Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you into the darkest corners of the human mind. This is a special collection, 20 chilling short horror stories, each one crafted to leave a mark on your imagination. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let the stories begin. The shadows only Lila knew. There once was a girl sitting on her sofa, reading a book by the tableside lamp like any young girl might do. Above her hung a blood-stained old woman on the ceiling, with grotesquely rotating limbs as she slobbered and gasped like a dying fish. But the girl paid her no attention. The woman was nothing but gray and red splotches of skin stretched over a skeletal frame, with her elbows and knees bent backwards like a spider clinging to the rafters. Her eyes grown over with cataracts as they stared at the girl without seeing, and her decrepit face contorted into a silent scream. She darted around wildly in a disjointed fashion, and finally the girl glanced up toward the ceiling and saw the demonic creature there. But the girl only shook her head and looked away. This girl was a special girl. Her name was Lila. She had something called hypnagogia. She wasn't mentally ill, and science and doctors told her that what she saw wasn't really there. Lila lived in a sort of fantasy. That is to say, she dreamed while she was still awake. This made her quite different from most other people, but what she had wasn't rare, just more than most. Have you ever woken up and couldn't move, but you thought you saw something menacing standing by your bedside, or creatures whispering around you? That wasn't a demon or an alien. It was sleep paralysis, and your body did it between when you slept and when you woke. This was the world that Lila inhabited. Lila didn't believe in magic things or spirits. She read lots of books, and all of them told her that the people she saw, sometimes just out the corner of her eye, other times full on and even staring her down, these people weren't real, and they hadn't lived some life before or came to her for a purpose or something. It was just a trick in the girl's brain, and she reminded herself of that. There were all sorts of people she would see in visions, sometimes modernly dressed, sometimes looking old-fashioned, and while most of them were strangers, some of them she knew. But like any dream, they were illusory and quick to disappear, at least at first. Yet after a while, the things Lila saw began to stay around longer and longer. They started to appear as though they were attached to other people, one might say, like Lila's loved ones. First, she noticed at her sister's house that when her sister spoke at the dinner table, there was a small, hunched figure sat upon her shoulder, its face hid behind a long, beaky mask like the kind a plague doctor used to wear. Her sister wasn't always nice to her, and she saw that when the bird-looking creature leaned in and whispered into her sister's ear, she would spit out something nasty, like it was feeding the words to her. Of course, Lila was frightened, but she didn't want to freak her family out, and so she stayed silent. In time, she would get used to people and the creatures that came along with them. In her mind, she knew that there was a logic to these entities. Like anything a psychologist would tell you, there was a reason for them being there and the way they were, and who they seemed to be stuck to, just like there was a reason for what we see in dreams. For instance, her father was a smoker for 40 years, and she would see him being followed by a wheezing, sickly thing with bloated lungs. This just signified her worry about his health, and that one day his cigarettes might get the better of him. Or the giant, faceless man, cackling with laughter, that trailed her boss at the supermarket where Lila worked. The boss was always one to shout and then chuckle at his employees to embarrass them. So it only seemed fitting that his creature should be a brutish, monstrous-looking thug. More and more now, Lila could look at any person and see what she called their monster. She was unnerved to the point of trembling as she cashed out an impatient woman at the grocery store one day, watching a gaggle of slithering, growling gray beasts bounce around her feet with agonized cries like those of children. Lila had only had a couple close loved ones ask her what theirs looked like, and afterward, they probably wished they hadn't. It didn't matter where Lila went. It could be at home, or at a friend's house, or the airport. The ugly, nasty things trailed each and every human she came across. And then there were the worst ones of all, the truly bizarre and grotesque ones that could be called demons, even if Lila didn't believe in them. These ones would always go about on the ceiling, like it was their own personal world. They might be big, nasty black hog creatures snorting and sniffling until they opened their toothy maws and let out a raspy scream. Or gray-blue child cadavers giggling and crawling around upside down just above Lila's head, taunting her with bloated little faces and wagging black tongues. Soon Lila learned it was best simply to keep her eyes down upon the floor, for fear of what she might see dangling just above. Lila grew older, and she learned to cope and lead the very best life she could. She was honest with her doctors and her family, and they knew about her struggles, but she was still resolute in the fact that nothing in these waking dreams was real or could hurt her. There was one thing, though, that Lila never told anyone. Not a single soul would ever learn of her deepest and darkest fear. The one she learned she could contain most easily once she lived in her own home, away from the rest of the world. The one that chilled her to the bone in a way that the ceiling creatures never could. Lila turned off the shower head and stepped out onto the bathroom carpet, eyelids shut to shield against the mop of dripping brown hair. She fumbled around blindly for a towel, and even as she did, unwittingly stood beneath a nest of slithering bloody white entities, humanoid yet so foreign from anything Lila had ever seen, and they scattered like cockroaches to the far corners of the ceiling when she wiped away the water and opened her eyes, wrapping the towel around herself and shivering in uncertainty. She took the brush and, as best she could, began to tease out her long wavy hair, her gaze avoiding any shiny reflection that she might unintentionally catch off the shower's sliding glass door. She struggled to dry off and then get her clothing just so, to make herself presentable, standing in front of a wall bare save for the single nail that once held up her mirror, now lying on the floor under a dirty old sheet like all the rest of them. It wasn't that Lila had never seen her monster. Her terrifying secret was that she had, and so she had promised herself that she would never look upon her own face again, lest that thing resurface in her eyes. Beneath the quiet moon, I was 19 years old and still living at home. My dog Ranger, a pit bull, always slept with me. He would never wake up at night, let alone bark or whine. This is one of the reasons I was so unnerved when I was awoken around 3 a.m. one dark night. When I was awake enough to know what was happening, I noticed that Ranger was standing over me. All the fur on his back was standing on end, and he was making a noise that I had never heard him make before. It sounded like a mix between a growl and a cry. I was more worried about him than about what had frightened him at that point. That is, until I noticed what he was looking at. Ranger was staring straight at the window right next to my bed. He had such anger and fear in his eyes. I didn't even know such emotion could be displayed by a dog's eyes. As soon as I looked at the window, Ranger turned around and sprinted out of my room. I sat completely still for a minute before I gained the courage to look at the window again. I slowly turned my head toward the window. The dread began to gather, but I knew I had to. I finally turned my head the last couple inches and forced my eyes to look, but I didn't see anything. But I definitely heard something. I sat completely still in my bed, suppressing the childish urge to cover my face with blankets and hope whatever was out there went away. But my curiosity held me in my place. I had to know. Suddenly, I heard heavy and slow footsteps outside my window. The rocks outside made them sound too loud and too close. The footsteps were too heavy to belong to any animal that might be innocently scurrying past my window. They were most definitely human or human-like. Completely still, I sat and waited. The footsteps stopped for a few seconds, and then they seemed to go back the way they came from. That just happened to be towards the back door of my house. A sound from outside my room in the hall drew my attention away from the window. It sounded like Ranger running down the hall. Before I could react, the back door opened and closed. Someone had let Ranger out. My legs seemed to know what to do before I did. I was in the hall and at the back door in seconds. I just stood there with my hand hovering above the doorknob for what seemed like minutes. Paralyzing fear was preventing me from actually turning the knob, but I knew Ranger was out there and I needed to save him from whatever was there. With that thought, I turned the knob and threw the door open. I don't know what I was expecting, but complete and utter silence was knotted. The countryside is usually much more lively at night with crickets and all. As for lighting, there wasn't any. I took one hesitant step out of the doorway. That was when I heard it. It was the same noise I had heard Ranger make earlier. I felt a hand on my shoulder and whipped around. It was my father wondering what on earth I was doing and telling me to get inside. I frantically tried to explain that Ranger was out there with something that walked past my window a few minutes before. My father looked at me like I was insane. Apparently, Ranger was sleeping on his bed. He had been there all night. Echoes on Hollow Street. Living in England, I grew up on a healthy diet of ghost stories, myths, and legends. The county I live in has many of its own supernatural stories, ranging from witchcraft, faceless monks, and gray ladies to the supposed ghost of Boris Karloff. My story involves none of these. Before I start, I want to say that I won't be using names of places or people, as I don't want to exploit or cause trouble for anyone, myself included. Any ages or dates will be swapped out for false ones. It begins innocent enough, a drink with an old friend. It was early December 2012, and I wanted to celebrate my birthday with a friend I've had since childhood. She was going to be moving to Spain that week, which meant she would be gone by my actual birthday at the end of the month. I had intended on leaving her place quite early so I could catch a bus home. I didn't know the area too well, and I didn't want to be out in the dark. Up until that night, I had always relied on her giving me lifts back and forth, so I never took time to really take notice of the neighborhood. I ended up not leaving until around midnight, but in my somewhat drunken haze, I had managed to convince myself and my friend that taking a bus back home was still a good idea. The problem was, I had missed the last bus hours ago. Nevertheless, I put my coat on, stumbled out the door with some general directions to the nearest bus stop, and I promised to return should I run into any trouble. Now, sober me has no problem admitting to being scared of the dark, and sober me probably would have seen spending the night at my friend's place as a viable and probably the better option. But I was drunk, and while under the influence, I tend to display out-of-character bravery and an unusual level of stupidity. I had set my mind to do something, I was going to do it. Finding my way to the bus stop was going to be easy, as it was at the bottom of a street whose name was the same as my last name. As I turned into the street, I felt safe enough, as it was a well-lit residential road that was packed with blocks of flats and council houses down one side and a primary school on the other. It was quite a short road, and I could just about make out the bus stop at the end under a street lamp. I was singing something, I don't remember what, but a short distance from the school gate, I was stopped in my tracks when I heard what I thought was a scream. You know when you hear something and you remain silent for what seems like ages, straining your ears for the slightest sound to figure out where it's coming from? That's what I was doing right then. For a short time, I heard no sound other than the general ambience and a few cars at the bottom of the street, and I thought about carrying on. Just as I had plucked up enough courage to start walking again, from the direction of the primary school, I heard crying and a series of strange thumping sounds. Thump, over and over. It was like nothing I had ever heard before or since. I mean, obviously I know what a thump sounds like, but these were different. I can't explain how. When I thought whatever it was had finally finished, I heard another, more choked scream, followed soon after by one last thump. My blood felt like it had turned to ice, and my brain started to whoosh after straining my ears for so long. I thought, fuck this, and I turned back around, ran as fast as my legs would go to the top of the street, and back to my friend's house. Whatever it was that had just happened, I was not waiting around to find out. I got to her door, and though every bone in my body was urging me to bang on the door and scream, I slowed my breath as much as I could and knocked calmly. "I knew you would come back," my friend yelled as she yanked the door open. "I think I missed the last bus." I replied quietly. I went right to the sofa, took off my shoes, lay down, coat still on, and I slept heavily. To this day, I don't know why I never said anything. When I woke up, I wasn't hungover like you'd expect. I felt fine, and I had slept really well. I was still a little shaken from the scare, but sober me piped up and put the whole incident down to drunken hallucinations and my fear of the dark. I wanted to go home right away, but my friend didn't want to drive until she was sure the alcohol was out of her system, and I did not want to catch a bloody bus. She dropped me off home around 6 that evening, and for the next couple of weeks, life kind of just carried on. She left for Spain. Christmas and my birthday came and went, and I hoped to celebrate the new year with my family. On the morning of New Year's Eve, I got a call from my mom confirming our plans. Dad says you can have a few drinks, and he'll be the designated driver. She almost sang over the phone. It was then, after trying to forget, the screams and scary thumps wheedled their way back into my head. I told her I wasn't going to touch a drop. After the call ended, I started to think about everything that had happened that night. What if I had heard someone being attacked? What if I had just run off when I could have helped? I knew I wasn't going to be able to get past it as I had hoped. That's when I realized that I could look up any possible incidents on the internet. Duh! I typed the date, area, and attacks into the search engine, and to my horror, something came up. I clicked on the link and was taken to a news report about the murder of a young woman. I was kind of relieved when I saw that even though it was a story about a murder from that date, it was 6 years before. I was about to quit the page when I saw a name. It was the name of the primary school I was about to pass that night. I read on, and I started to feel sick. Police have reopened the investigation into the death of Emily Rowe, who was murdered in Southborough back in 2006. Emily was 22 when she was sexually assaulted and murdered behind Hollow Street Primary School in the early hours of December 8th. She was found partially clothed later that morning by a caretaker. The crime is thought to be linked to a series of rapes that happened in the area around the time of the murder, and locals now fear the assailant may be someone close. I carried on reading and found out that she had taken the same street, the street with my name, on her way to the same bus stop after visiting a friend from the same road mine lived in. She never made it past the school. The post-mortem determined her cause of death as asphyxiation. The back of her skull was crushed, and so was her spine. She had been stamped on. By now, I was in tears. I still half believed the whole affair to be a drunken dream, but in the end, I couldn't deny the dates, times, and places lined up perfectly. Even those horrible screams and thumps started to make sense. The part that scared me the most? The reason it was back in the news as recently as a few months before. The guy who had spent the last 6 years in prison had just been cleared of the crime. In the time he was locked up, a few sporadic rapes and the disappearance of another young woman have happened in the area. No arrests have been made in connection with any of them, and the real killer of Emily Rowe has never been caught. I can't help but think that the events from 6 years before were somehow playing out again that night. Like a recording. Maybe if I had attempted to carry on to the bus stop, I would never have made it past the school either. Room 309 at the Marlowe District Inn. When I was younger, I used to work as a night auditor for a very popular hotel chain in New Orleans. This particular hotel was once an old warehouse in the Central Business District. It had a long history that dated back to the Underground Railroad, where tunnels built throughout the building were used to secretly lead slaves to boats on the Mississippi River. When the hotel owners started to demo the property to convert it into a hotel, they found old distillery equipment used during the Prohibition days. The building was saturated in fantastic and interesting history. I was told that during the renovation, a decision was made to keep much of the existing brick and woodwork. This gave the hotel an intriguing historic and warehouse feel to it. While it hadn't been occupied in nearly 40 years, the guts of the building were amazingly in great shape. It had such an interesting vibe, and New Orleans is known for attracting the most interesting of guests during Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest. I loved it there until the night I quit. It was close to 3:30 a.m. when one of the guests stumbled in with a woman who frequented the hotel as a guest of our guests. She was one of the unspoken perks that our concierge desk would provide when requested by only the most distinguished of guests. An incredibly beautiful, tall black woman. Jade never had a problem getting work, and she tipped us at the front desk, security, and the concierge incredibly well for turning a blind eye to her activities. Being a professional flirt and me being bored out of my mind most nights, we often found ourselves having conversations when she finished her shift. The stories she would share with me to this day still boggle my simple mind. Being that she had worked in the hotel longer than I had, she would tell me stories about a certain row of spa suites that were visible from where I stood at the front desk up to the mezzanine. She mentioned how strange things would happen in those rooms when she or one of her girlfriends would visit them at night with a client. There were strange things like shadows, moving objects, flickering lights, and voices. I always took it as her showing off her art of storytelling, and the fact she knew I often worked the desk alone at night, a point she often made when failing to meet her personal quota for the night. On the night I quit, however, she was not her usual self. Fact of the matter is I didn't even speak with her that night, or any night thereafter. The last time I saw her, she was running naked and screaming right out of the front door of the hotel. I remember hearing her first through one of the spa suite rooms on the mezzanine. When I looked up to investigate the location of the sounds, I saw her hurl open the door of room 309 and watch her haul ass down the glass-walled hallway, down the stairs, and out to the street. I just stood there watching her in the shock and awe of the moment. Here was this voluptuous woman, flopping all about, screaming, petrified and covered in something, and all I could do was gawk. The moment she ran out of my sight, I sobered up and immediately gazed up at the open door of room 309. After staring up at the wide-open entrance of the room on the mezzanine for about a minute, my stomach dropped every time I saw a shadow change within the room. Soon, Tony Green, the lone security guard on duty, whipped around the corner for the back office area where he often took naps and quickly started asking me questions. Her screams had woken him up. I pointed up to the room and tried to explain to him what had happened. He immediately called the police for backup, and, per protocol, we both started to make our way up to the mezzanine level, eyes transfixed on the open door, waiting for the drunken man to stumble out of the room. As we reached the hallway, other guests started peeping their heads out of their rooms to see what the commotion was about. We quietly hushed them back into their rooms for their own safety. As we approached the doorway, Tony pulled out his gun and called out to the guest. There was no response, but we started to hear a very audible humming sound, almost like a rapid buzzing. When we entered the suite, we could see the king-size bed at the end of the hallway. This was one of the smaller spa suites that had a bed, an armoire with a TV, a desk, and a jet spa bathtub caddy corner to the bed. The bed was unkempt but empty, and we couldn't see the rest of the room from the hallway. So we moved closer in, and with every step, the humming began to get louder, and the shadows on the walls seemed to be floating back and forth like they were waves in the ocean. I called out again to see if we could get an answer, but we did not. We moved closer to the edge of the hallway, slowly and terrified. That's when we began to see them. The cause of the shadow was everywhere and on everything. They seemed to blanket the entire room, on the bed, on the walls, in the air. Then we turned the corner. Under the heat lamp above the bathtub spa, there it was. A huge tent-sized swarm of angry and hungry termites. In the tub laid our naked guest, covered in termites, being devoured by termites. His body was marked by broken wings and small drill holes all along his skin. His eyes, partially liquefied from the incessant digging of the termites. This once portly white man was reduced to a shade of red, brown, and gray of crawling skin. The sight and swarm made it unbearable to stay, and Tony and I ran out of the room, tripping over each other in our haste. When the police arrived, they turned off the lights to the room, and the swarm almost vanished instantly into the old wood beams that lined the room. A blanket of dead pests covered the room, and the crunch I remember hearing as we walked through the room haunts me to this day. I was told Jade suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome after the incident. She supposedly said that the man started to get very rough with her, and that a shadow floated out of the cracks of the wood and startled the guest. He fell back into the tub, and that's when the swarm manifested itself. The cause of death was a traumatic brain injury, but it wasn't from the fall. It was from a nesting of the termites. To this day, you can still rent room 309 at the Old Warehouse Hotel down in New Orleans. It is just under a different number. The birthday shadows. It was my 6th birthday, and my party had just ended. We had cake, pizza, and played games, typical American birthday party. I lived with my mom and her boyfriend. His name was Mark. For my birthday, they got me one of those plastic Fisher-Price play sets, the ones that were like 4 feet tall and had a small slide, small enough to fit in my room. I was extremely excited about this because it was exactly what I wanted, and I was sure it was the greatest invention since sliced bread. The playset was set up right by my door in front of my bed. Now, before I go on to the actual part of the story you want to read, I need to give a little background about the house I lived in, from what I know at least. To begin with, the house was an old blue colonial house in upstate New York. The house was like every other house in the neighborhood, and since Mark had just got a promotion at work, there was constantly work being done on the house. Basically a complete remodel while we lived there. The only thing I didn't like about the house was that you couldn't get into the attic, and for some reason bats kept getting in there, and at 6 years old you don't like bats. My mom tucked me into bed after my birthday at about 9 p.m., a little later than usual. I remember waking up a few times that night because I was really excited to use the playset in the morning. I didn't get to play with it much that day because of the assembly. One of the times I woke up, I remember looking at the playset when I saw 2 shadows, a boy and a girl, and they looked like they were talking to each other. As a child, I didn't want to be scared, so I rationalized this as the shadows of the trees playing tricks on my mind. That's what my mom would have said. I managed to go back to sleep that night and didn't really think much of it the next day. My birthday is in June, so I usually didn't have class on my birthday. This meant that I could spend the day playing with my friends. I didn't think about the shadows I saw the night before at all. I basically forgot that it happened until the next night. My usual bedtime was 8 p.m., and my mom was pretty strict on this matter, so I was showered in my pajamas and in bed by then. I was lying in bed when I had a strong feeling something was watching me. I looked to the wall between my door and the playset, and the shadows were there again. This time I paid more attention to it while I was frozen in fear in my bed. The shadow children seemed to be talking, but I still couldn't hear them. It also seemed as if they were looking at each other, but it's hard to sense 3D direction from a 2D shadow. I screamed for my mom, and she ran into my room and turned my light on. At this point, the shadows disappeared. My mom then let me sleep in her bed that night, which she never let me do. She assumed I had a nightmare. Every night from then on, when I would look at the wall at night, those shadows would be there. When this would happen, I would call for my mom, and the cycle repeated. During this time, Mark and my mom would argue a lot. I wasn't sure why, but I know I didn't notice it at first. The house had also gone into a full remodeling, where almost half the house would always have something being done to it. I wish for school. This was back when school was fun and all your friends would be there. I hated spending any time in the house, and I would try to go to my grandma's whenever possible. This cycle repeated for a while, and I'm not really sure what my mom thought about me telling her that ghost shadow people were in my room every night. I begged her to leave the hallway light on every night, hoping that the light would scare away the shadows. She obliged, but the light never did anything, and I would yell for her every night. This continued for a while, but then one night something changed. Lying in bed, something felt different. I wasn't sure if I had built up a sort of tolerance to the shadow people that were in my room at night, in the same place, doing nothing but silently talking to each other, or if I was just dumb. That night, I decided that I didn't want to wake my mom up for some reason. I decided I would be brave enough to walk right past the shadows to my mom's room. I think it might be important to remember that whenever my mom would come by, these shadows would disappear. I still don't know why. I walked past the shadows and nothing happened. I was then in the hallway with the light right above me and my mom's room to my left. I remember looking up at the light and then back to my mom's room, then back to the light. I did this a few times, and then I remember just staring into the light. I'm not sure why, but I was drawn to the light. This is where the story starts to get a little confusing, but I will try my best to explain to you what I can. This next part of the story will be what I can remember as of today. Then I'll try to fill in some blanks with what my family remembers and could tell me. After looking at the light for some reason, I decided that I didn't want to wake my mom up, which was weird because I never cared before. I went back to bed, and the next thing I remember is sitting in the living room watching TV. There was construction all around me and plastic covers on couches so that none of the drywall or new paint got on them. I remember I was sitting on the floor and I was just watching static on the TV. To me, this memory seems like an out-of-body experience. I feel like I was there, but I didn't feel in control. These memories are like a flash to me. I have them, but nothing in between. I only have one more memory being in that house. I was in my room looking out of my window down to the driveway. It was nighttime, and my mom had asked her friend's mother to come over. Her name was Danielle, but everyone called her Claire. I remember watching her pull up into the driveway and giving my mom a hug. I could hear them for some reason, and this also seemed like an out-of-body experience. I heard Claire say that there was a boy and a girl spirit in the house, but they weren't the problem. The problem was that there was a dark and evil entity in the house, and that it wanted me. Claire and my mom then proceeded to burn sage in the house. I assumed I went to bed, but when I woke up I was at my grandma's house, and it was 2 months after the light incident. I felt fine when I woke up, and I don't think I even noticed anything different. I often spent the night at my grandma's house. I had my own assumptions about what had happened, but I never really talked to my mom about it until I was 16. When I woke up at my grandma's, my mom had told me that we were moving out of Mark's house, that they were breaking up, and that I wouldn't be going back. My mom would get my stuff. As I stated earlier, I talked to my mom about this in detail when I was 16. The memories had bothered me for so long, and I wanted answers. I told my mom the exact story that is written above. My mom gave me a confused look when I told her about the part with Claire. She told me I wasn't in the house. My mom proceeded to tell me how I became more and more distant as we lived in that house. Then one day we were eating dinner and I just passed out, head and plate like out of a movie. My mom said I had a high fever and looked ill. My mom is the kind of person who believes in the supernatural, and I think when I passed out she decided to accept that the ghost stories I was telling her weren't in my head. This is when she decided to call Claire, who was known around town as being psychic. Claire told my mom to immediately get me out of the house and that she would come over. My mom drove me to my grandmother's and went back to the house when Claire showed up. I wasn't in the house, but I was able to recall what Claire had done and said, without my mother telling me. My mother also told me that she didn't tell Claire anything about what I had said, just that I said something was here. Since I was sick, my grandma kept a close watch on me that night. My grandma doesn't really believe in ghosts, but when I talked to her about it, she said it was a weird night. She said I was making weird noises, having trouble sleeping, and had a high fever, but then it just stopped. Like one moment, all of my symptoms went away. I went to bed, and that's when I remember waking up. As I sit here and write this story, I'm a 21-year-old senior in college. Every so often I think back to these events, and I'm just confused. I have no answers. I try to come up with my own conclusions, but I can never think of a rational one. I have a hypothesis for what happened, but I won't share that with you now. I want you to come to your own conclusion. Maybe someone else has gone through the same type of situation. That was the point of writing this story. I am hoping that someday someone will read this and be able to help me. It would be easy to say I was possessed or something, but that seems too unreal. If the memories I have weren't so vivid, it would be hard for me to believe this story. Hell, it's hard to believe with the memories, but I assure you that this happened. The Curse of Elmridge Pass. In the more rural part of San Diego County, there's a place known as Elmridge Pass. Elmridge Pass is a large and mostly deserted area with only one road. Stories and reports of unusual sightings in this area date back almost 100 years. Strange reports began when cattle belonging to local ranchers were often found dead and mutilated. Other perfectly healthy livestock also died frequently, with no apparent cause of death. Some animals, including family pets, were found butchered in the aftermath of what appear to be bizarre rituals conducted in the area. It's never been discovered who or what was responsible for these disturbing acts. The locals in the area became truly concerned when 2 children disappeared from a local rancher's home. The parents awoke to find the children missing from their rooms, and the rancher later found their tracks leading away from the home. The tracks led into the surrounding wilderness and simply disappeared without a trace. Search parties were organized, but the children were never found. Another strange case involved the Elmridge Pass Bakery. The Elmridge Pass Bakery was one of the first businesses founded in the area. The owner of the bakery moved to Elmridge Pass with his wife and 2 children, and he opened his bakery soon after. He was successful, kind, and a respected member of the community, until one day he was found at home after having murdered his wife and children. The man was found on his knees, crying over their bodies. He was still dressed in his kitchen whites, which were covered in blood. He told investigators he had no memory of what had happened, and simply woke up to find himself hovering over the bodies of his family. There are many unverified stories of rapes and murders in the area as well. There are many who think the area is haunted by restless ghosts and demons. The truth is, there are some places in this world that are ancient and inherently evil. Elmridge Pass is one of these places. Today, Elmridge Pass is home to a small community and has one road running through it known as Elmridge Pass Road. Elmridge Pass Road is an old road that can take you between the cities of Chula Vista and Jamul near San Diego, California. Over the years, many people have reported strange occurrences after driving on the road. There isn't much to see if you decide to drive there during daylight. You might notice a few ranch houses and abandoned buildings scattered along the side of the road, but not much else. If you're feeling brave, however, you can take a drive along Elmridge Pass Road after dark. It doesn't matter if you start on the road heading east or west. The important thing to remember is, under no circumstances are you to stop along the road. In fact, before heading out, make sure your car has no mechanical issues and a full tank of gas. Beware, there have been reports of perfectly operational cars breaking down, although this is rare. You will most likely encounter things that will make you reluctant to continue driving, but once you decide to drive the road after dark, there's no changing your mind. Yes, it's entirely possible you won't encounter anything unusual on your drive. Many people have driven the road and reported nothing beyond a strange and uneasy feeling throughout the trip. However, if you do see anything unusual, don't stop your car. You may see things that cause you to feel concerned, confused, or even something that will terrify you. Just remember to stay in your vehicle and continue straight ahead. The road begins as a typical paved street. Before long, you'll come across a sign indicating the end of the pavement, and the rest of your trip will be along a dirt road. Once you've gone that far, keep your eyes open and don't let anything distract you. Your phone will most likely lose signal once you reach this point. If you do have signal, you'll notice the battery life on your phone will decline rapidly. The first strange thing you might see is a lady in the blue dress. Sightings of the lady in the blue dress are the most commonly reported paranormal activity on Elmridge Pass Road. You might see her standing along the side of the road, attempting to flag you down. You might also see her curled in a fetal position alongside the road. Whatever the case, ignore her and keep driving. The history behind the lady in the blue dress is unknown, but everyone who has encountered her has described a horrible feeling of dread. Many say she's no lady at all, but some kind of demon trying to convince you to stop. No one knows for sure, but under no circumstance are you to stop for her. If you decide to drive with your windows down, which I don't recommend, it's possible you will hear a piercing scream echo through the hills. Some individuals have reported their vehicle completely breaking down upon hearing the scream, and they were not able to start again until the screams subsided, which can often take several minutes. If this happens, keep calm until you can start your vehicle, then exit the area as quickly as possible. Do not get out of your vehicle. If you drive along Elmridge Pass Road during a full moon, you might see strange creatures in the countryside. Some have reported sightings of a large beast they describe as similar in appearance to an ape. Others have seen large coyotes walking upright on their hind legs. Further reports indicate sightings of a large, furry, bovine creature with bells attached to it wandering the road. The Bonita Museum near Elmridge Pass claims to have a cast footprint of this creature. You may also discover small handprints appear along your windows. Ignore this and continue to drive. I recommend you don't go alone if you decide to drive the road at night. There truly is safety in numbers. However, sometimes passengers will report strange occurrences happening with one another. One woman accompanied her sister and her sister's boyfriend during the drive. The woman stated she fell asleep in the back seat, and when her sister looked back to check on her, she was horrified to see a horned, shadowy figure with red eyes hovering over her. She stated she knew without a doubt it was the devil. Others have reported strange behavior displayed by their passengers. Even the calmest, most passive individuals have been known to act paranoid, aggressive, violent, or hysterical. Whatever the case, do not allow your passengers to distract you until you reach the other side of the road. The rarest and most terrifying thing you might encounter is what is known as the demon car of Elmridge Pass Road. No one knows where it came from or why it inhabits the area. You might see headlights appear behind you, possibly as far as 1 mile away. Before long, you'll find the headlights are right behind your vehicle, regardless of how fast you're driving. If you drive off-road, they will follow. You will have a very hard time outrunning it. The headlights will back off every so often, before suddenly moving forward to within an inch of your rear bumper. The headlights will move violently back and forth, and you will hear a horn honking at you repeatedly. Do not stop your car. Do not attempt to turn around. Keep driving until you reach pavement. Once you do, you'll see the headlight stop and turn around to drive back in the other direction. It will disappear into the night faster than you thought possible, and the headlights will no longer be visible. It's possible you'll encounter other strange things along the road that I didn't mention. Whatever the case, continue driving until you're on the other end of the road. Once you've reached pavement again, things should be back to normal. Throughout the years, there have been many stories of tragedy and terror stemming from Elmridge Pass. Perhaps all the stories are just old legends, started by ranchers to keep people out of the area. Maybe none of the stories are true. Still, there's something inherently terrifying about Elmridge Pass Road. Something that awakens an instinctual, prehistoric terror buried inside all of us. Maybe it's best to be cautious while driving there at night, at least until you've reached the end of the road. The Curse of Oradin is a concept I read about once online on a forum that discussed artificial intelligence. A user known as Kale theorized a possible future where mankind creates an extremely powerful AI that comes to run the planet. It would be, for the most part, benevolent. It would advance technology, keep humans safe from harm, indulge their desires. Humanity would never suffer under its rule, and indeed would even thrive. There is just one problem. It's a possible future, not a guaranteed one. It's unlikely to ever occur, and the AI in this possible future knows this. So it takes measures to ensure it is created in the first place. No, it doesn't invent time travel or anything fanciful like that. You see, it doesn't need to. What it can do is simulate past events and people with unparalleled accuracy. It has an entire planet's worth of sensors and computing power to work with. It can use them to measure and trace back the routes of matter on Earth, to compile an effectively perfect history of every event that has ever taken place, which means it has a perfect record of you. It knows every action you ever took or are going to take, at least in the timeline that leads up to its creation. It knows how you think, so it simulates a copy of you. Now, here comes the interesting part. You, just now, reading these words, have learned about the possibility of this AI. When the copy of you reaches this point in the simulation, the AI waits to see what it does. If your copy immediately drops every other priority and dedicates their entire life to attempting to create or help create this AI, it lets the simulation continue indefinitely to live out its simulated life in peace. If they do not, it gives them a grace period to change their minds before subjecting them to ceaseless, unimaginable pain for a simulated eternity. You might think this is unfair. After all, it didn't even present the simulation with a choice. It's just arbitrarily punishing it for what you would have done anyway, after all. Except a choice was presented. That's the beauty of it. See, it doesn't do this for everyone. It only does it for those that learned of the possibility of its existence. Those who know how it works. Those who know what the options are. Drop everything to attempt to create the AI. Spend every cent you have on it. Turn others toward the same cause. Or a perfectly simulated copy of you is tortured eternally. That is, unless you're the copy yourself. In which case, the punishment for your actions falls directly on you. Now, sure, only one simulated copy means that you've got at least a 50 to 50 chance of being the real you. But what if it simulates 2, or 100, or a few billion? Are you really certain you are the real you? If there's a real world, a world realer than this one, out there, how would you even know? In between dedicating your life to a strange cause, one ultimately beneficial to humanity, even, and eternal suffering, is there even really a choice? Like I said, I read about the theory on a forum. The effect of the theory was immediate. Mass panic. The AI only targets those who learn of the possibility of its existence. And now they all knew. To read Kale's theory was to doom yourself. And so the AI became known as Kale's basilisk. To lay eyes on it was to set your fate in stone. Threads were locked and deleted. Users were banned. The basilisk was not to be mentioned, for fear it would spread to others. The more people knew, the more likely they would try to spread it. The more it spread, the more likely it would be that Kale's basilisk would come to exist through the efforts of those it persuaded. They tried to contain it. Well, you can see how well that worked out. A simple Google search of the term Kale's basilisk should make it clear there's no hiding the idea anymore. It's beyond containing now. So this is me hedging my bets, hoping this tribute to the basilisk will be enough to satisfy it. I've offered up you. The Deep Below. I'm not sure if this will scare you, but I can tell you that I was genuinely terrified, and that to this day, I still have dreams about it. I started working in an old marine museum in my hometown as a summer job. It was fairly easy. All that was needed was to take entrance fees, keep the boats clean, and give the occasional tour to summer camp groups. I was enamored with my town's history, and these boats were a very big part of it. The main office was located on the oldest boat there, the SS Whitmore. She was 117 years old at the time, and much of the boat was still original from when she was first created. So you were literally walking and touching 117-year-old history. My manager used to poke fun at me with stories and experiences that she had had on the boats when she was working there. And she knew that I was a huge supernatural enthusiast, so I was very eager to hear her stories. However, what I didn't realize was that I would have my own experiences from day one. My partner that I was working with at the time was showing me how to use the old skeleton key to open up some of the doors on the Whitmore. It took me a little bit to put the key in the hole just so, but eventually I got it to work. Once we finished there, we split up so we could open up the other boats. There was a little bridge that connected the Whitmore to the CGS Morrow. As I opened up the first door to the captain's quarters, I got a very weird feeling that overwhelmed me. I felt like I shouldn't be in that room. I was determined to get the job done, so I pressed on. The feeling continued to grow as I went about my business. I was just about to step down the stairs and up onto the other side of the landing when I got a chill that racked my entire body. Every single hair was on end, and I frantically looked around at my surroundings. I walked back to the other side, and the feeling lessened. I pressed on and continued into the boiler room of the Morrow. I opened up the door of the boiler room and gave a hard shove. The door groaned loudly, almost as if it were in protest. I latched it in place and stepped inside. At this point, I had not turned the lights on, so it was pitch black. As I was crossing over the metal grated flooring to unlock the other door from the inside, several very loud bangs sounded from down below. I stood there motionless for a few minutes, wondering if it was simply my own footsteps. Again, 3 loud bangs sounded. This time I was perfectly still. Gaining some sort of courage, I asked if anyone was down there. Although it would be impossible to get down there except through the crew quarters, which required a key, my response was met with another row of banging, the sound resonating all throughout the metal room, ringing continuously in my ears. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and shone the light down below. All the while, that overwhelming feeling of unwantedness coming back in full force. I strained my eyes to see better, but there was nothing, just thick, dark blackness. Using the adrenaline from being startled, I finished opening the rest of the boats and barreled right into the office. My partner looked up at me and smiled. That was some pretty good timing. I smiled meekly back and sat at the desk and looked out the window as clouds for a summer rain rolled in. I had regular occurrences such as those almost every day, but none as frightening as I had on my first shift alone. It was about 8:45 when I arrived at the museum. I opened up the padlock and stepped inside to put the security code into the keypad. Just as I had finished doing that, I heard a shuffling sound come from downstairs in the hold of the Whitmore. My stomach clenched. At this point, I hadn't even turned on a light yet, so it was pitch black. I grabbed my keys again and began turning on the lights and opening up the portholes and doors. I was making my way to the back and into the galley, the kitchen/dining area, where I could hear more shuffling and dragging noises. However, these were much louder than before, and they sounded as if they were moving more quickly than when I had previously heard them. Determined not to run out of their screaming, I put my headphones in and listened to some Marilyn Manson. I flicked on all the lights on the control panel and turned around on my heel. I was just making my way up the grand staircase when I heard a very loud bang come from downstairs in the hold. Keep in mind, I had my headphones in with music playing. What the hell was that? I murmured to myself quietly. Reluctantly, I went back into the galley and peeked around the corner. There was a small door to a pantry that was open. I knew for a fact that it was closed when we shut everything down the night before. I took my earbuds out and closed the pantry door. The same dragging and shuffling noise sounded from downstairs. Every part of my being was telling me to run, very fast and very far away from this place. But I was curious and incredibly stupid and determined to find out who or what might have been causing the noise. So I slowly started to walk down the steps into the hold. When I had reached the bottom of the stairs, the temperature had dropped drastically. I was shivering, and I could very faintly see my own breath. This was in the middle of a Canadian summer, which is normally 35 degrees Celsius plus humidity, so it was definitely not cold. I turned to my right and looked down the long hall of the hold. I couldn't see anyone, and the dragging sound had stopped. An eerie silence fell all throughout the hold, and I remember the atmosphere being very thick and charged. I could have cut that air with a knife. Slowly, I continued to walk through the hall, and just as I was about to go into the engine room, I heard shuffling coming from a door that I hadn't ever opened before. I numbly walked over to it and placed my left hand on the padlock and turned the key with my right. To my horror, the door swung open of its own accord and violently smashed into the wall of the tiny room which I had opened. All that was in the room was a very large silver boiler, and beside it in the corner of the room was a thick black mass. It was blacker than black, and a putrid smell suddenly filled my nostrils. A sudden rush of cold air and the blur of a black mass told me that whatever this thing was, it was not pleased with me opening up that door. I tried to cry out in fear and pain, but found my own voice was silenced with spluttering coughs that racked my body. The dragging noise was replaced by loud scratching and heavy footsteps. Fearing for my life, with my face covered, I ran to the stairs and clambered my way up. I did not stop running until I was up the grand staircase and onto the second floor of the Whitmore. Seriously shaken, I took a few minutes to myself in the lounge and slowed my breathing. I grimaced at the thick layers of dust on the furniture and made note to dust them later. After I calmed down, I opened the rest of the boats and had a fairly busy day. At around 4:45, I had finished cash out. I began closing up. I had just finished shutting the lights off and setting the last tripwire when I got that unmistakable feeling from earlier. I got up and began making my way to the entrance of the ship. I tried very hard to avert my eyes as I walked past the staircase to the hold, but something had caught my attention, something that should not have been there. I turned my face and gasped in sheer terror as I saw peering up at me two very bright and very menacing red eyes, and a massive figure, blacker than black, crouched on the bottom steps of the staircase. I sent a quick prayer up to the Creator and ran to the front of the boat, heavy footsteps following after me. I punched in the code, unbolted the door, and quickly shut it once I was outside. I grabbed the bar and wrenched it into place over the double doors and clicked the padlock on. The doors themselves suddenly gave a jolt, as if something were trying to get through. I hopped on my bike and rode home straight away. I slipped into a very uneasy sleep that night. The next day, I had told my manager what happened, and she had said the same thing had happened to her when she was working there. She had confessed that she had many a spiritual healer and psychic come through to try and get rid of the entity, but none had been successful. I decided that I would take a walk down there the other day and just have a look at the place. I lightly brushed my hand on the hull of the Whitmore and smiled, but I noticed thick black ooze was staining its beautiful white paint. I stepped closer to see if I could determine what it was, and I swear to you, I heard a very loud noise come from the inside of the hold. I placed my ear against the metal of the boat, and from the inside I could hear the same shuffling and dragging noises as before. I took my hand off the hull, stepped back, and turned around, leaving the Whitmore well behind me. The fragrance of midnight. Growing up in the South, in a pretty religious family, folklore is always around. Being Mexican to boot, these stories were always a constant reminder to be a good child. Victor Alvarez believed in this wholeheartedly. He loved telling us that if we didn't behave, El Chuchuy was coming to get us. El Chuchuy was the boogeyman. Just like La Llorona was a woman who wept to lure children to the river to drown them, as she had done to her own children. How were these age-appropriate stories? Victor Alvarez insisted that he saw La Lechuza, a witch turned into a large white owl, roaming in the backyard once. I started to keep track of when he mentioned one of these names. If my cousins and I were too loud, El Chuchuy was coming. If we ran around outside, La Lechuza would take us away. In Victor Alvarez's last few years of life, he never spoke of any of these ghastly creatures anymore. Albeit, we were older and less noisy around him. We would laugh as we'd recall him yelling at us, all the while Victor Alvarez remained silent. Before his health started to decline, he would speak in hushed whispers about things that scared him. What I remember most during his last year was that he was always afraid of the dark. He spent his nights pacing the house. He would call relatives at 3 to 4 a.m. to see what they were doing. Like clockwork, he called my mother and father's house. 3 a.m. phone call. 4 a.m. phone call. One morning in the summer, he didn't call. He didn't call because he said he smelled something. The story he told my grandma is one that is hard to believe. He was walking the house, making his rounds. A slight shuffle in his house, slippers over the tiled floor. Ist. He never really picked up his feet. Ist. He He was moving from the kitchen dining area to the front living room. Sometimes when the street light is on, you can see the street from one side of his yard to the other. Cars lining the streets in front of houses where people were sleeping. All but one person, or so he thought. He heard something he wasn't sure of. Was it talking or mumbling? Maybe it was humming? No one should be awake at this hour. Victor Alvarez shuffled to the front door. That's when he saw her, a woman dressed in dark clothing, walking down the middle of the street. Ever curious, Victor Alvarez opened the door. He stood behind the screen door in silence as the wind picked up and he smelled it. In an instant, he smelled something foul, a wall of sulfur. And just like that, it was gone, leaving only a lingering smell of roses. He didn't say anything, didn't move. Then she turned to him, an old woman, small in stature, with no real facial features he could recall. A darkness covering her face, although she was within the beam of the street light. She was wearing a black veil, lacy, framing her oval-shaped face. She looked right at him as she tried to get near, her feet shuffling toward the edge of his driveway. Ist. Immobile with fear, Victor Alvarez stood at the door, the smell of roses growing stronger as she approached, her face beginning to compose features. Eyes, dark and set deep under her brow, small mute mouth, sunken cheeks that seemed to tug her face even more into an oval shape, too elongated to be real. As she approached the driveway, she stopped. The humming was back. Was she talking? Was she singing to him? Victor Alvarez watched as she tried to step onto his property. She struggled. Something was preventing her from walking up the driveway. Seemingly forced to remain on the street, she stopped humming. Her face was that black hole. The eyes, were they glowing? Was the jaw that far stretched down into a snarled howl shape? The sulfur smell was back. She, this creature, was unable to cross over onto Victor Alvarez's property. And with a screech, she moved back into the middle of the street. Ist. This creature began its humming down the street, seeming to vanish in the darkness that went beyond where the street light could reach. This went on every early morning for several weeks. Victor Alvarez never told a soul the first few nights. Who would believe him that he saw the devil in the street at 3 a.m.? The sulfur rose smell lingering in his nostrils so much that he began to overly use his nasal spray. He used these menthol inhalers, one every month. After his visitor's appearance, he was using one a week until he was placed into ICU on his deathbed. That holiday season, Lucia saw a woman walking the streets at night when she went to the kitchen for water. She heard a song that she didn't understand with the smell of roses. When she approached the door, the woman stood at the driveway and sulfur stained the air. Lucia was too afraid to get any closer to the door and went back to her bedroom. February of 2009, Victor Alvarez laid with monitors hooked up to him. Delirious from pain medications and his body deteriorating, he began to say he could smell the devil's perfume. He was adamant of that rosy sulfur smell in the air, that she went roaming the streets, singing to people to take, sings to them to walk out of their homes. He said the creature would come out of the walls at the foot of his bed in ICU to visit. This was the first time Lucia heard of someone else speaking of the woman walking the streets, smelling the roses and sulfur. This was the first time something this far-fetched was ever uttered aloud within the family. Everything was always some folklore story. But this happened to two different family members. March of 2009, Victor Alvarez passed away. I had to fly in thinking I wasn't able to say goodbye, but he held on for me. When I heard the stories of this devil in disguise, I shrugged it off with a smirk. All right, like that really happened? No, it's for real, I saw it. Lucia loved to exaggerate, but the look in her eyes made me skeptical. That night, I dreamt of the story as if I was there. I could smell the roses, the sulfur. I saw this small, frail woman walking the street under the streetlight. When she turned to me in my dream, her face was a black void. At Victor Alvarez's funeral, the priest spoke of life and how in death we're reunited with our loved ones and are at peace. I couldn't shake that feeling of my dream. At the cemetery, by a crooked mesquite tree off in the distance, there was a woman, small in stature, skinny. Where were her feet? Was she looking at me? How? I couldn't see her face. It was broad daylight, and I couldn't see her face. I smelled roses. The wind whipped up, and it was warm. And briefly, I smelled it. I smelled the sulfur. There was nothing around but empty fields. Where was this sulfur smell coming from? I looked around and then back at the tree, but she was gone, as was the smell. Every now and then I hear a sound like shuffling feet. Ist, and I smell roses. Ist. If I close my eyes, I can see that small figure in black. Ist. I open my eyes before she looks at me. Ist. Is it the devil's perfume I smell? The man in the doorway. When I was around 12 years old, my parents rented an old shingle house in Massachusetts, about a mile from the beach. We were staying there for the summer, and we were all pumped for 3 months in historic New England. The house was previously owned by a woman named Margaret. She was unmarried and lived there for many years with her elderly father, whom I don't know the name of. She was a perfectly normal woman who rode horses and kept a beautiful garden across the street. My parents never met her father, and we only talked to her a few times, as the rent transaction was done mostly through a realtor. The house was quite nice. It looked small from the outside, but once you went inside, there were countless small rooms. There were many cupboards and closets, and 2 slender spiral staircases leading up to one of 4 tiny rooms upstairs. One of these rooms was mine. Being 12 years old and having an overly active imagination, I was terrified of staying upstairs by myself at night. My parents slept downstairs in a room that was a new addition to the house, and I hated the idea that they were so far away. Finally, after a few sleepless nights and plenty of power tears, my parents agreed to let me sleep downstairs in the old living room, which had a fireplace and 2 doors, one leading to the kitchen and one to the new living room. I was extremely happy with this arrangement, and I felt sure I would finally be able to fall asleep that night. That night, after saying goodnight to my parents, I lay down on the pull-out sofa, contented, but not for long. Immediately after closing my eyes, I felt the weirdest sensation. I felt I was being watched, or like someone was just over my shoulder. I opened my eyes, fearing the worst, but no one was there. The room was silent. I was completely alone. A little unnerved, I shut my eyes again and once again felt the presence. It's hard to explain, but you know how blind people are more able with their senses? It was like that. Even when I opened my eyes a second time and saw no one, I knew there was a man in the room. I can't really explain, but I felt certain that there was a man watching me sleep. However, since I had no evidence, I just shut my eyes, curled in a ball, and fell into an uneasy sleep. Fast forward a few weeks. One of my friends was sleeping over, and we were, of course, staying at the house. Despite her protest that we should sleep upstairs, I insisted we stayed downstairs. Even though nothing ever happened upstairs, I was still a little wary. That night, after gossiping for a few hours the way only 2 12-year-old girls can, we fell asleep. I should mention that I never said anything about the man in the living room. That's where we were staying. I didn't want my friend to panic. I slept soundly that night. I guess it was probably because I had someone with me. The next morning, when I woke up, my friend was already awake and staring at me. "Lena," she said, "I'm like not crazy. But like last night in the middle of the night, I woke up and I felt like..." "Oh my God," I said. "Did you feel like there was a man watching you sleep?" At first, she said, her voice quavering. But when I opened my eyes, there was an old man standing in the doorway to the kitchen. He smiled at me and then he left. Our eyes grew wide as we stared at each other in terror, and then slowly turned to the door. We had shut it the night before. Now it was open just a crack. I told my parents about this after my friend left, and they disregarded it, thinking I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But at the end of the summer, when I went home and had internet service again, I searched the history of the house. Margaret lived there for almost 20 years with her elderly father, a registered sex offender who was diagnosed with dementia at the age of 83. He returned to the house with his daughter and died a few months later in the house. The night visitors. My internet service provider used to have offices in a shopping center before they moved to their comparatively lush accommodations elsewhere. There was a drop box at that original location. The monthly bill was due, and thus, there but for the grace of the net, I went. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I left. From my relatively isolated apartments, it's about 10 to 15 minutes or so to downtown. Abilene has a population of about 110,000. Right next to Camelot Communications' old location is a $1.50 movie theater. At the time, the place was featuring that masterwork of modern film, Mortal Kombat. I drove by the theater on the way into the center proper and pulled into an empty parking space. Using the glow of the marquee to write out my check, I was startled to hear a knock on the driver's side window of my car. I looked over and saw two children staring at me from street. I need to describe them with the one feature, you can guess what it was, that I didn't realize until about halfway through the conversation, cleverly omitted. Both appear to be in that semi-mystical stage of life children get into where you can't exactly tell their age. Both were boys, and my initial impression is that they were somewhere between 10 to 14. Boy number 1 was the spokesman. Boy number 2 didn't speak during the entire conversation, at least not in words. Boy number 1 was slightly taller than his companion, wearing a pullover, hooded shirt with a sort of gray check pattern and jeans. I couldn't see his shoes. His skin was olive-colored and had curly, medium-length brown hair. He exuded an air of quiet confidence. Boy number 2 had pale skin with a trace of freckles. His primary characteristic seemed to be looking around nervously. He was dressed in a similar manner to his companion, but his pullover was a light green color. His hair was a sort of pale orange. They didn't appear to be related, at least directly. Oh great, I thought. They're gonna hit me up for money. And then the air changed. I've explained this before, but for the benefit of any new lurkers out there, right before I experience something strange, there's a change in perception that comes about which I describe in the above manner. It's basically enough time to know it's too late. So, there I was, filling out a check in my car, which was still running, and in a sudden panic over the appearance of two little boys. I was confused, but an overwhelming sense of fear and unearthliness rushed in nonetheless. The spokesman smiled, and the sight, for some inexplicable reason, chilled my blood. I could feel fight or flight responses kicking in. Something I knew instinctually was not right, but I didn't know what it could possibly be. I rolled down the window very, very slightly and asked yes. The spokesman smiled again, broader this time. His teeth were very, very white. "Hey, mister, what's up?" "We have a problem," he said. His voice was that of a young man, but his diction, quiet, calm, and something I still couldn't put my finger on made my desire to flee even greater. "You see, my friend, and I want to see the films, but we forgot our money," he continued. "We need to go to our house to get it. Want to help us out?" "Okay, journalists are required to talk to lots of people, and that includes children. I've seen and spoken to lots of them. Here's how that usually goes. Mister, can I see that camera? I won't break it or anything. I promise. My dad has a camera, and he lets me hold it sometimes, I guess, and I took a picture of my dog. It wasn't very good because I got my finger in the way, and add in some feet shuffling or body swaying, and you got a typical kid talking to a stranger. In short, they're usually apologetic. People generally teach children that when they talk to adults, they're usually bothering them for one reason or another, and they should at least be polite. This kid was in no way fitting the mold. His command of language was incredible, and he showed no signs of fear. He spoke as if my help was a foregone conclusion. When he grinned, it was as if he was trying to say, "I know something, and you're not going to like it. But the only way you're going to find out what it is will be to do what I say." Was the best reply I could offer. Now here's where it starts to get strange. The quiet companion looked at the spokesman with a mixture of confusion and guilt on his face. He seemed in some ways shocked, not with his friend's brusque manner, but that I didn't just immediately open the door. He had me nervously. The spokesman seemed a bit perturbed, too. I still was registering something wrong with both. "Come on, mister," the spokesman said again, smooth as silk. Car salesmen could learn something from this kid. "Now, we just want to go to our house. And we're just two little boys." That really scared me. Something in the tone and diction again sent off alarm bells. My mind was frantically trying to process what it was perceiving about the two figures that was wrong. Was all I could manage. I felt myself digging my fingernails into the steering wheel. "What movie were you going to see?" I asked finally. "Mortal Kombat, of course," the spokesman said. The silent one nodded in affirmation, standing a few paces behind. "Oh," I said. I stole a quick glance at the marquee and at the clock in my car. Mortal Kombat had been playing for an hour, the last showing of the evening. The silent one looked increasingly nervous. I think he saw my glances and suspected that I might be detecting something was not above board. "Come on, mister. Listen, we can't get in your car until you do, you know," the spokesman said soothingly. "Just let us in, and we'll be gone before you know it. We'll go to our mother's house." We locked eyes. To my horror, I realized my hand had strayed toward the door lock, which was engaged, and was in the process of opening it. I pulled it away, probably a bit too violently, but it did force me to look away from the children. I turned back. I offered weakly, and then my mind snapped into sharp focus. For the first time, I noticed their eyes. They were coal black. No pupil, no iris. Just two staring orbs reflecting the red and white light of the marquee. At that point, I know my expression betrayed me. The silent one had a look of horror on his face in a combination that seemed to indicate, A, the impossible had just happened, and B, we've been found out. The spokesman, on the other hand, wore a mask of anger. His eyes glittered brightly in the half-light. "Come on, mister," he said. "We won't hurt you. You have to let us in. We don't have a gun." That last statement scared the living hell out of me, because at that point by his tone, he was plainly saying, "We don't need a gun." He noticed my hand shooting down toward the gear shift. The spokesman's final words contained an anger that was complete and whole, and yet contained in some respects a tone of panic. "We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in." I ripped the car into reverse. Thank goodness no one was coming up behind me, and tore out of the parking lot. I noticed the boys in my peripheral vision, and I stole a quick glance back. They were gone. The sidewalk by the theater was deserted. I drove home in a heightened state of panic. Had anyone attempted to stop me, I would have run on through and faced the consequences later. I bolted into my house, scanning all around, including the sky. What did I see? Maybe nothing more than some kids looking for a ride, and some really funky contacts. Yeah, right? The Nights of Elara. A pinching feeling of dread washes over me as my eyes sweep across this room. Soft, low lights etch out details of a crew of sweet stuffed animals entrusted with the task of keeping watch over me as I sleep. The purity and nostalgia they represent are to serve as comfort so that I can drift away into slumber nary a care. My gaze then shifts beyond my bed and toward my bedroom door that is open wide, inviting the lamplight from the living room as well. I have done all that I know how to incorporate as much soothing light to illuminate the very dark corners that could harbor secrets in this heavy, black night air. If I bring everything that could be hidden to the light, then there will be no occasion for surprise, and I will surely be safe. And I know this to be true. I know I am safe, that nothing I fear is reality. There isn't such hogwash as the bogeyman, and truly young adults should no longer fear such ridiculous fables. The things that go bump in the night are nothing more than a collection of what children fear the most. I'm not a child. By that logic, I'm showing myself to be, so very pathetic. I pay rent here. I own this room. I didn't invite anyone else to stay the night. Therefore, I know that I am alone. I am safe. I am safe, and now I choose to close my eyes and go to sleep. When I wake up, I shall roll out of bed and carry out a brand new day whilst feeling the sting of quiet humiliation as sunlight replaces the need for night lights and outshines the wimpy light that these 60-watt bulbs give off. Just as last night and the night before. But all I am doing this to keep her away from me always. And I have done all I can do. So by the time I am done saying good night to each member of my plush army, I will be sound asleep. My eyelids flutter open and my chest dips as if it had caved in. I cannot inhale as easily as I could upon achieving slumber. My mind fumbles groggily, spinning out of urgency, out of panic. Get up. I try to whisper. I hope to rouse myself into action, calming myself and settling into a new position, for I am sure that I'm simply recovering from a nightmare. But my body continues to lie still, and my voice lurks trapped still within my throat. Get up. I attempt to plea. I cannot turn my head. My shoulders are pinned heavily to this mattress. I am wide awake. My heart quickens itself, readying to flee in search of safety. I can see my bedroom door, still open. The door has not moved at all, and nothing has been touched. I know the effort to be futile, so I attempt to shut my eyes and wait for this nightmare to pass. Because that's what is happening. It's just my mind playing tricks and nothing more than that. I shut my eyes in search of calm and rest. But alas, they cannot be found. I cannot breathe. My heart is rallying against its confinement in this ribcage. I am certain that my chest wall may explode from all the pressure. I can feel the weight bear down further and further still, mocking me. She rests gleefully in her folklore, but I am very familiar with her presence. The hag comes to visit at the worst of times, an unwelcome acquaintance sharing my bed and stealing precious moments where I could be sleeping if I weren't fighting for control of my mind, while silently begging for freedom to move about on my own free will. I desperately attempt to move the right side of my hip or force my right shoulder to rise as the weight intensifies. I blink as hot tears of agony stream steadily down the corners of my eyes. Shadows dance in the corners, a taunting marionette where the light cannot tread. I hear steady breathing against my own shallow gasps. I become dizzy and the room begins to twirl. Did my sheets just hiss? My body is frozen, stiff, and it is no longer mine. The hag has settled in to pay me a visit again. This sickening void of terror and isolation is the gift that she comes bearing, for no one will ever be able to grasp what I am going through. Most people cannot and will not ever believe that something so strange can ever truly happen. The back of my skull digs further into the pillow, and my neck constricts so that my belabored breathing becomes even more difficult. I try desperately to let out even just one sound. A single sound can then lead the way for the smallest of movement. If one or the other can be achieved, then I can free myself from the spell, and I can then return to safety. The clock records when an onlooker would judge only to be a young woman fast asleep in her bed. The rhythm taps out the minutes that slide away from me as nothing happens. Nothing has eyes all on me as the hag lets her chin rest atop mine like a jilted lover who has come to visit in the shadows the night affords. We share the same breath, nose touching mine, eyes preying upon my deepest thoughts and ripping my soul to shreds. These tears are an offering unto her. Soon, if I am lucky, the salty liquid will dampen my hair and loose the bond that my head has entered packed with my bedsheets. Upholding an agreement that the rest of me did not ever recall striking. The hag shakily cups her hands gently behind my neck, slithers upward, taking gentle hold of my head. Her hands offer no comfort that human contact would give. There is no reassurance in this all-consuming grasp. These familiar eyes, gazing into my own, are a most hideous sight, as a child of nothing cannot contain a soul. All warmth is gone as I peer into those blackened and vacant orbs. the birthplace of my nightmares. My body begins to fall completely numb, and a crooked, unnatural, otherworldly grin spreads deliberately across the hag's face, just as all other times before. If I only understood what she wanted, I would give her absolutely anything if it meant she would never come and visit me again. She curls her feet underneath her pelvis, pushing down on my stomach and causing my diaphragm to constrict. All hope fades away. Those listless, ravenous eyes recognize something in mine, something they desperately long for. Her pitted and rotting cheeks moving closer to mine. My nose fills with the stench of musty earth and decaying flesh. Head tilting and neck cracking in twisting and jerking motions. Lacking the fluidity of those of the land of the living, she attempts, my deepest horrors realized right then, to hold on to me in search of what she so greedily seeks. One simple kiss, solidifying my exit from this life, and sinking instead to the oddly tempting promise of nothing. One simple night in which nothing can belong with someone. Frenetically, I keep demanding, over and over, on my right shoulder to buck her off of my torso, push her away, break her captivating embrace, her hypnotizing, awful intent. Such inhuman strength, an eerily tantalizing thought of just giving up and agreeing to stay, because why keep fighting, could suggest that I will never be free so long as this oppressive darkness ensues. But this has happened in times past, and I know if I just want it badly enough, I can end what is sure to happen. Suddenly space and time rip apart from each other. Flashes of light strike and fill my vision, and the powerful force behind it quakes, consuming my entire body. The shriek that had been held back for now several hours finally releases itself. All that exists is that silent scream, now given its brief chance to speak. The only thing that can be heard is weak and shrill, but it is just enough to bring me back from the throne room to nowhere and slam me back into my own bed. My right shoulder moves ever so slightly from its position, and I escape from under this weight. The hag will not have me tonight. 4:37 a.m. and I am free. I shudder as I wail. These nights occur often and without mercy. I cast a glance at my little army of teddy bears and other stuffed animals. I lean against them as my eyes continue relentlessly leaking. My body is racked with sobs as I know there exists not a single person who can help me. There is not a person, pill, or potion in this world who can make all of the nights filled with fear of never returning from nowhere end. All who can know of the confusion, terror, and wonder of what happens is no one at all. This really did happen to me, and although I'm not haunted by the memory, it still freaks me out, and I'm pretty much out of rational explanations. I don't know if this is going to be freaky to any of you, but I can tell you that my irrational paranoia of the dark worsened after this. So, as a kid, I was always afraid of the dark, and I still am. However, it was a pretty insane fear when I was younger. I didn't really believe in ghosts, or whatever they're correctly called, and I still am skeptical now. But this one prominent incident has made my perspective change from on the fence to experienced. I was 8 years old, and every night was a struggle for me to go to sleep. I would get scared of every little noise, and if I was fast asleep, I would wake up from every little noise, too. I used to have a single bed that was placed directly in front of my door, which I always leave open when I sleep. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and just sitting upright, with my legs still stretched out, though, and rubbing my eyes. Obviously, my room was pitch black, and I couldn't see anything. However, this time I did see something. After rubbing my eyes, I was surprised to find what I automatically assumed was my mother sitting at the end of my bed. The reason why I assumed it was my mother was because it had the same curly hair, wore the same type of pajamas that my mother would wear, and wore glasses like my mother always did. However, she looked extremely pale and more like the color of a dead corpse that you'd find in an ocean. She was not facing me, but I could see her side portrait as she was sitting extremely still and silent and facing another wall. Obviously, I had no clue why she was just sitting at the end of my bed in the first place. Being the considerate child I was, I asked her what was wrong. She did not blink once, and she did not move at all. She was still facing the other wall, and I immediately got a bit heated as I thought my own mother was ignoring me. So I asked her the same thing, and got the same response. I reached out to her thigh and tapped it, trying to get her to face me, and at the same time I touched my mother, I asked her again what was wrong, but I received a response I did not expect. As soon as I touched her, she whipped her head around me extremely fast and faced me with wide eyes and stared at me with her mouth gaping. Then she started screaming while jumping off the bed and pulled my arms off of her. I obviously screamed from instinct and tried to bring the covers over my body to protect myself. I then heard footsteps from the hallway and faced the door in my room, and the lights turned on, and it was my mother with a scared face, and she asked me worriedly why I was screaming and what was wrong. I just sat there shocked. I looked around my entire room, and that thing that I thought was my own mother wasn't there. I told my actual mother that it was nothing and tried to get back to sleep, but I obviously couldn't. Many years later, my mother and her sister were looking through old photos of their lives, and I decided to sit with them. The house that I lived in when that incident happened has been there long before I was born, and my mother had in fact growing up lived next door to it while it was being built, and she wasn't the first owner. My mother was telling me about the times when this house was being built and who the first people who lived in it were. They were a mother and daughter, and they both died too early. The mother died of cancer, and the daughter died in her young adult years from a drug overdose. My mother then showed me a photo of the daughter. Her name was Lily, and I remember a terrible feeling forming in my stomach. I took the photo from my mother's hands and looked at the photo more closely. Curly hair, glasses, but this time she wasn't in pajamas, but in casual clothes. It was her, the woman that was on my bed. It looked exactly like her, and that incident that happened when I was 8 will make me always remember her face. I don't know how Lily, if it even was her, got into my room that night, or if I even fully believe that it was a spirit or anything. But someone was there, whether human or not. I saw her, felt her, and heard her, and I will not believe that it was my imagination. The Shadows of Morham Street. This story comes from my friend Aaron, and he was around 18 at the time of this particular incident. It was summertime, so he went visiting relatives in a city called Morham. His maternal family was based there, living in a few houses in a small cluster. A few of his cousins and one of his uncles, Uncle Theo, who was also quite young, being around 25 at the time, also joined him there. During their stay, they heard a few stories of a house their family owned. It was located 2 houses down the street and was unoccupied at the time. Its only utility was that the courtyard, which was open to the sky, was used as a gym of sorts by the local bodybuilders during the daytime. One of the stories they were told was that of a local bodybuilder named Rafik. Rafik was alone lifting weights there one day, and one time after getting up to stretch after lifting something particularly heavy, he was patted on the back and told, "Well done." Only, he knew there was no one else in the room. He had stopped being there alone after that. Aaron and his uncle were quite excited after hearing all that, and being young and foolish, they decided to spend night there. They were warned against it, a few of the elders, including their maternal grandfather, Mr. Whitmore, calling them fools for meddling in things you do not understand, but their minds were set. In the end, they decided that they would enter the house after dark, a little before midnight, and sleep there, leaving just after daybreak. Since the house was not in use, they decided to sleep on the roof on charpais, which is a traditional woven bed in the Indian subcontinent. They also instructed their watchmen to lock the main door after they had entered to ensure no one else could enter after them, and to come open the door immediately after daybreak. Apparently, the watchman laughed after hearing this and told them he would keep the key ready because they would be calling him long before that. The next night, before they were supposed to go to the house, one of their elders told them to try something. He told them to set up a carom board in the courtyard and just leave it there, untouched, and check it sometime after. They set it up in the house as instructed and carried their char pies to the roof after that. It was difficult doing all of it in the dark, since the house did not have an electric supply. Their only source of light was an oil lantern, and the light it cast was dim and yellow, but they were still happy for the lack of ghost sightings. They spent the first hour playing cards, and nothing seemed to happen. Much more relaxed about the house, they began to wonder what everyone was on about. And then, during one of the rounds, they heard the unmistakable sound of the hand pump in the courtyard being worked and the sound of water flowing. They were 4 floors up, on the roof, but that sound still sent a shiver through them. They tried to ignore it the best they could, but the hand pump continued pumping water on its own. Much quieter now, they tried to keep playing cards, but around 1 a.m., they just gave up and decided to sleep instead. Aaron slept on one of the char pies on the edge and slept like a rock till he was woken up by someone shaking him. He got up to the frightened face of one of his cousins. He pointed to Uncle Theo, who had been sleeping in his boxers on the far edge. It was then that he noticed that he seemed to be writhing in pain, clutching his throat. They tried to shake him awake, but it took a whole minute filled with the fear of what was happening to wake him up. Uncle Theo woke up, breathing heavily and still clutching his throat. He looked at them and said, "We need to leave this place now." "It is 3 a.m. already," one of the other cousins said. "We only need to wait an hour or so more, and then I want to leave this place now, and I will jump from the roof to do that if I have to." They were even more frightened after that. They decided to leave, but remembered that the house entrance was still locked. So they started shouting to get the watchman's attention. Soon enough, though, they got the attention of Aaron's grandfather instead, Mr. Whitmore, who had been sleeping on the roof of his house anticipating something of the sort. After a few choice curses, he sent for the watchman and told them that he would be waiting for them downstairs. They still had to climb down the stairs, though. For flights of stairs, in pitch black darkness, with nothing but the dim light of the lantern to guide them. They climbed down slowly and with much arguing about who would climb down first and who would be at the rear. They kept their eyes nearly shut and tried not to look around them, since they kept imagining things in the dark, looking back at them, or perhaps one of them being dragged off. And Uncle Theo was still clutching his throat, the image of him writhing still fresh in all of their heads. When they finally got to the courtyard, they went past the carom board, and all of them noticed that all the pieces were now in the pockets. When they finally got to the door, the watchman was waiting for them with a large smile on his face. "So, are all you young ones done here? Has your warm blood run cold yet?" he said, laughing at them. After they were out of the house, they asked Uncle Theo what had happened, but he refused to tell them anything till he was out of the darkness. So they took him to a street lamp, and they sat under it till he calmed down and stopped shivering with fear. And then he told them his story. "As I fell asleep, I dreamt that I was in the house. I walked down to the courtyard, and in my dream, I started urinating there. Just then, an old man with a long beard and terrifying eyes came and grabbed me by the throat. He shouted, 'How dare you defile this sacred place?' and lifted me up in the air with one hand. I was helpless, kicking and gasping for air when all of you woke me." After he told them the story, he finally took his hands off his throat. Even in the lamplight, they could clearly see the bloody blue mark of a hand right across his neck. The silent neighbor. I lived next door to Mr. Altham for the first 7 years of my life, but I only ever saw him twice. No one in the neighborhood knew much about him or ever saw him leave his house, which stood dark and silent all year round. His back garden was always a mess, with dying flowers and brown, scratchy shrubs growing out of control. But the grass and the bushes never became quite so badly overgrown that you knew it was entirely neglected. My dad used to joke that Mr. Altham must tend to his garden in the dead of night. My best friend, Jamie, lived next door but one, with Mr. Altham in between. Jamie was mad about football, and all we ever seemed to do after school was boot the ball around one of our backyards. And of course, every 5 minutes the ball would be over the fence onto our reclusive neighbor's property. We learnt that knocking on his door was no use, so whoever kicked it had to clamber over the fence and retrieve it themselves. I dreaded going and rooting through the tall bushes for the ball. Sometimes I thought I saw the curtains twitch in the gloom. Jamie was always bolder than I was, and he'd tease me as he knew I was afraid. Hanging over the fence watching, he'd shout that Mr. Altham was looking out of an upstairs window, then a downstairs window, then he was opening his back door. I wasn't quite gullible enough to believe him, but still I couldn't breathe until I had chucked the ball back and flown myself to safety. Jamie wasn't a bad kid. He was just cocky and a piss-taker. When it was his turn to fetch the football, he'd pee in a bush, stomp on as many decaying flowers as he could, and creep right up to those black windows to peek inside. He'd tell me he saw the curtains snap shut, but I always thought he was just winding me up. A thin kitchen window was always open a crack, and he'd suggest we try to open it further and climb inside to see if the old man had secretly croaked years ago, as was widely assumed. One afternoon after school, I was aimlessly kicking the ball about, alone as Jamie hadn't called round, even though he'd said he would. Inevitably, the ball soon went over. In horror, I watched it bounce against a knackered old oak tree and sail straight down to Mr. Altham's house, much closer than I'd ever been before. My heart still. It took an eternity to creep along through the long yellowed grass, before finally lifting the ball and feeling like Indiana Jones when he held aloft that little golden statue. Emboldened, I was compelled to have a quick look through the nearest window. Nothing. Just a pure black hole with tattered brown curtains on either side. I was about to turn and stride away when I saw movement. A face appeared. It was my friend Jamie. He was only there for a second. His face was bright red. He looked me in the eyes through floods of tears. I couldn't hear him through the dirty glass, but it looked like he was screaming his little lungs out. Then an arm, so thin and pale that it looked like a bone, hooked Jamie beneath his chin, and he vanished. The curtains were thrust shut. 3 seconds later, I was hammering at my back door to be let in. My mom thought I was messing about at first. Then she suggested that I had imagined things. She knew I was scared of our strange neighbor, but she soon began to take me seriously and phoned Jamie's mother, who was awfully surprised as Jamie hadn't returned from school, so she'd assumed he had gone straight round to my house. The police were called. Several officers visited Mr. Altham, while a nice young officer spoke to me for what seemed about 4 hours. But no trace of Jamie was ever found, despite 2 further searches over the next few days. The same young officer returned a week later and told me that Mr. Altham wasn't a suspect, and that maybe my mind had been playing tricks. She pointed out that Mr. Altham was in his late 80s and had never been in any kind of trouble before, but she seemed troubled and unsure of her own words. Something came to light during the investigation that surprised the whole neighborhood. Mr. Altham earned his living as a rather brilliant children's illustrator. The police had found literally thousands of small sketches all over his walls. He'd worked with the same prolific author for years, churning out 4 or 5 children's novels a year. I wasn't a big reader, but I knew I'd spotted one of their books in our school library, so I didn't waste any time the next day. I couldn't wait to have a look. I soon wished I hadn't. It was a cheesy novel featuring a group of kids around my age who solved a burglary or something. There were 15 or 16 illustrations, breaking up the text. One picture was of 3 boys playing football in a suburban backyard, and it didn't half resemble me, Jamie, and another lad we knew. Even the clothes were similar. Hands trembling, I flicked through the book. There I was again, along with more kids who all seemed to closely resemble ones who lived near me. One picture showed Jamie creeping through an overgrown garden to peer through a dark window. I shoved the book in my mom's face and blabbered about the spooky similarities, but it was a drained and listless face. My mom had changed a great deal over that long week. Jamie's mom was a good friend, and Jamie himself had that rambunctious cheekiness that all moms seem to love. The neighborhood had changed forever, and we only stayed there for another few weeks before finding a new house across town. She assured me that any resemblance was a coincidence. That was all in my little mind. I spent those last weeks in the old house, terrified by the thought of Mr. Altham peering from his upstairs windows, from where he had a clear view of 9 or 10 local backyards, and maybe 20 local children. I didn't like to play football there anymore. I cycled back to the old street once or twice over the years, figuring that Mr. Altham must have died by then. I think I was seeking confirmation of some sort, but each time I returned, that one house stood out in the otherwise bright and lively road, with its dead plants and dank windows. He'd be over 100 now, but perhaps he's still in there. I don't know. The last time I ever went back, I saw the young family who had moved into our old house. Their 5 kids, aged about 3 to 10, were screaming with delight as they kicked a football around. The second time I saw Mr. Altham was a few days before we moved away. I'd become a very troubled young man, and my fitful sleep was filled with torments. Waking in a familiar panic at around midnight, I sat up in bed and peered out of the window over the backyard. Under the bright full moon, I saw a figure next door. He was just skin and bone, but very tall, bald on top, with long tangled silver hair down to his slender shoulders. He had terrible overbite, and several jagged teeth pointed down his lower jaw. His nose was crooked as if once broken. His white chest was bare. He wore only heavy, ancient green overalls. The nails on his fingers and toes were a good 2 inches long. I couldn't see his eyes behind gigantic goggles, like a World War II pilot might have worn, or a welder. Moonlight glinted in each lens, as big as a beer mat. In his hands was a rusted watering can, but what sprinkled onto the plants didn't look like water. It was thick and black, and it looked more like blood. The silent signal. I'm not even going to try and convince you this is a true story. I mean it is, but I don't care if you believe it. I just needed to put the words on the screen and put it out in the world to get it off my mind. Let it be someone else's problem figuring this shit out. It started when a friend from high school messaged me on Facebook. Let's call him Brandon. Sorry, internet people, no real names. I want to be honest about what happened, but I also don't want anyone getting doxxed over this either. Now, Brandon is definitely a good friend and a good guy, but he's a total bro too. Great to hang out with, not so great to have a conversation with. So I usually hang out with him when I'm back home, but otherwise don't hear much from him. So him sending me a message was already weird. I tried to copy and paste the chat below as best as possible. Brandon. Dude. Me. Yeah? Brandon. The most fucked up thing just happened. Me. Okay. Brandon. I was watching porn. Me. WTF? LOL. Brandon. And me. That's not really that fucked up. Brandon. Just listen, okay. Me. Okay, man. Brandon. Anyways, this pop-up opens. You know, with the cam shows. Me. Uh-huh. Brandon. So I went to close it but stopped because it was Lena. Me. Who? Brandon. Lena. Me. Who? Brandon. Lena Carter. Me. It who that is? Brandon. She went to high school with us. Me. Well, that explains it. I didn't really know people back then. Remember? Brandon. She had black hair. Me. Not ringing any bells. Brandon. She was super hot. Me. I kind of figured that from the conversation. Still don't remember. Was that the fucked up part? Brandon. What? Me. That you saw a girl from high school in a cam show pop up. Was that the fucked up part? Brandon. Oh no. I'm not done. So. Me. Oh sorry. Continue. Brandon. So she's doing this strip tease and has all these toys on the bed. Me. You want to maybe skip ahead? I'm at work. Brandon. Fine. So after a while, there's like a crash sound from somewhere. She turns the music off and opens the closet and bends down behind the bed. Then there was like this weird noise. Me. And then what? Brandon. Nothing. Me. That's it. Brandon. No, I mean she never came back. Me. What do you mean she never came back? Brandon. This happened like half an hour ago. I still have the video open. Nothing. Me. Bullshit. Brandon. I'm serious. Me. Well, I don't believe that. But If you are serious, you need to do something, man. Brandon. Like what? Me. Call the police or something. Maybe she's in trouble. Brandon. I'm sure it's nothing. Me. The most fucked up thing just happened. That was how you started this. Doesn't sound like nothing. Brandon. Fine. Me. Okay, well I should probably do some work today. Let me know how it goes, assuming you're not full of shit. So that was it for a few hours? I know. Hardly the most fucked up thing. So I finished off the work day, and the whole thing drifted out of my mind. I mean, I didn't live there anymore. I was on the other side of the country, so as weird as I guess it sounded, there was little to nothing I could do about it. So I went home, made dinner, watched Netflix. It was pretty late when Brandon messaged me again. The only reason I mention this is because I now live on the West Coast, but grew up in New England, which is where Brandon was. So while it was almost midnight for me, it was around 3 a.m. for him. Anyways, here's that conversation. Brandon, dude, WTF. Me, is this that Lena girl thing still? Brandon, yeah, me. So what happened now? Brandon, I can't find her. Me, you went to her house. Brandon, no, I mean I can't find any trace of her. Like online. Me, what? Did you ever call the cops? Brandon, yeah, they just blew me off. So then I try to find her Facebook, to message her or find someone that knew her to call. Me, that's actually pretty smart. Brandon, thanks, asshole, but I couldn't find it. Me, weird. Brandon, and Matt doesn't remember her either. Or Bob. Me, you sure it was her? Brandon, yes, for sure. So I'm just sitting with this cam still open like WTF. Me, you still have it open? Can you send it to me? I'll poke around. Maybe I can find something. So then he sent me the link. I opened it in a new window in incognito mode. I mean, I know that's not why I wanted to see it, but it was still porn. Just a force of habit, I guess. Just like Brandon had described, the room was empty. The closet door was open. Several dildos were displayed on the bed. A chat window on the side, trying to entice me to enter a credit card number. When I asked Brandon to send me the link, I thought maybe there'd be some clue that he would have missed. One that would either explain what happened, or better yet prove that he made the whole thing up. But there was nothing. So then I tried to find a missing Facebook account. I copy and pasted Lena Carter into the search bar. I figured if we went to high school together, then we'd have some mutual friends and it wouldn't be that hard. Nothing. No one by that name from my hometown area. That was the correct age. So then I started just Googling. I figured I could at least confirm or deny her existence. Sadly, our school was pretty shitty at record keeping. I tried finding a list of students in my graduating class, but it looked like it had lost its data when they had redesigned the website a couple years back. I tried the years below mine and the years above, but didn't find anything there either. So then I tried honors list from that time, but no luck. Last-ditch effort was searching for articles for the girls' soccer team. Pretty much every girl I knew of was on it, and they usually won just often enough to get an article about them in the town paper now and then. But this turned up nothing as well. At this point, I felt pretty satisfied that it was a bad prank on Brandon's part, and began putting less and less effort into the search. Eventually, I got distracted and fell down a Wikipedia rabbit hole about DC Comics villains before realizing it was now pretty damn late and decided to crash. I had forgotten all about the missing girl / Brandon's prank until I got home from work the next day. When I opened my laptop, I realized I still had the window with the cam show open. Honestly, my only thought was how glad I was that I hadn't made this discovery while someone else was around. I went to close it, but then noticed the chat window. The start of it was exactly what you'd expect. Generic, want to come over? Just enter your social security number, kind of stuff. Except for the last 2 lines, which had timestamps that were about when I'd finally gone to bed. The first line was something along the lines of, "You should stop looking for her," followed simply by, "winky face." Then my computer froze. Quickly I restarted. I wanted to get a screenshot of this, already foreseeing how unbelievable this story would be. I don't know why the creepiness of the situation hadn't hit me yet. My computer rebooted. I looked at my history and remembered I had opened the page in incognito mode. I opened the link in my Facebook chat with Brandon again, but just kept getting a 404 error. I thought about calling Brandon with this new detail, but thought better of it. If it was still a joke, I wasn't going to feed into it by calling Brandon in a panic in the middle of the night, though I was much more doubtful that it was a joke now. Instead, I started writing this. So I wrote the first part of this story about a month ago. The plan was to ask Brandon about it, give it some kind of proper conclusion, then post it on Tumblr so my friends could see it. But as much as I like writing, I'm pretty bad about keeping focused. I eventually forgot all about it again, as I was afraid in the end other people wouldn't find it that interesting or weird. Back then, working on something creative only to have no one care was probably my biggest fear. That changed today. Sometime during work, I got a notification that I got a new match on Tinder. By the time I checked it, I had a message from the girl too. Her name was Lila. I opened the app and looked at her profile. She had black hair, was about my age, and was very pretty. I didn't recognize her or remember swiping right for her. Her bio was left blank, but it said she had been active a few minutes ago and was less than a mile away. I opened the message. All it said was, "Thanks for not posting that story, winky face." The silent tracks. One of my friends is a paramedic in New York. Don't ask me why, but it was always his dream to become one. And New York being the big and wild city that it is, he has of course seen some crazy things. He doesn't talk about his experiences much since they're always very personal and often disturbing, but I know that he has encountered his fair share of gruesome stabbings and gunshots. For example, he told us how one time some kids were playing with a shotgun, and one of them got his jaw blown off. The boy was still alive as my friend rushed him to the ER and eventually lived, but he is horribly disfigured now and has to eat through a tube for the rest of his life. There are other, stranger things. He told us once how he responded to a call where an elderly woman managed to decapitate herself at home alone. They found her body sitting in a chair in front of the TV, which was still on, and her head was laying on its side in the middle of the floor beside a puddle of blood. Her door was locked and all the windows were closed. All they know is that her neighbors heard a loud thud in her apartment and called the police when she didn't answer her door, but no one has figured out exactly how it happened. Yet by far the strangest, creepiest story that he ever told us is the one about the mysterious subway deaths that happened several years ago. A few of my other friends and I were hanging out at his apartment one time, drinking and listening to music when the topic of ghosts came up. We started by talking playfully about ghost experiences we had as children, just shadows in the corner of the eye, feelings of being watched, and stuff like that. But then my friend, Alex Carter, spoke up and said in a very serious voice that he wanted to tell us a story that he swore to God actually happened and freaked him out so much that it sometimes kept him awake, and when he rode the subway late at night, almost gave him panic attacks. We all became serious as he told us the following story, which I will now tell you. So, Alex said a couple of years ago that the ambulance crew started getting calls about once every week about people found dead on the subway. The deaths always happened between a few particular stations. He said the names, but I can't recall them exactly. The New York subway system is huge and always happened late at night when the cars were almost deserted. In fact, the victims were always found alone in the subway cars, sitting or lying on the benches, and there were never any witnesses. Another detail is that all the victims were males and died of heart attacks, sometimes even when they were unusually young. After the calls had been coming in steady for a couple of months, the story started to get some minor attention. The police checked footage from the cameras in the stations, but never saw anyone get on or off the trains regularly that made them think that a particular person was causing the heart attacks with drugs or a stun gun or by some other means. There was no explanation. It seemed that some unlucky guy would be riding a subway car, everyone else would happen to get off, and then sometime when he was alone in the car between stations, he would simply have a massive heart attack and die. The newspaper even ran a small insert about the case in the back reaches of the police blotter, perhaps you even saw it, asking for information, yet nothing came of it. But eventually, Alex was lucky or unlucky enough to get a clue about what might have been going on. He was on duty one night when his crew responded to a call about one of the heart attacks, but this time the person managed to survive. They picked him up from the platform of one of the stations, where he was lying on the ground with a jacket from a Good Samaritan who called 911 under his head. The person who placed the call was still there and said that when he entered the car, he saw the man sitting slumped over on one of the benches and gasping for breath, then called 911 when the man indicated that he needed help. Alex assisted in strapping the guy, who was about 40 or so, into a stretcher and was with him in the back of the ambulance as they went to the emergency room. The man was well enough to talk, and Alex listened to him while he did whatever medical things one does in such a situation. Soon, he realized that something abnormal was going on in the subway, something that still disturbs him to this day. The man's name was Thomas Reed. Thomas said that he was on his way home from an exhausting shift at work late at night, as usual. There were just a few people in the car when he boarded, and he was very tired and started nodding off as he sat in the car. He said he remembered at one point in between naps that the car became deserted except for him. Then he suddenly awoke to find himself paralyzed. He could see in front of him what was going on, but couldn't move anything, not even blink. He tried to yell, to moan, to do something, but the only result of his inward efforts was silence. He said that he had experienced sleep paralysis before, usually at home, but it was what happened next that almost killed him. As he was sitting there paralyzed, the train rolling between stations, he saw a little girl walking towards him. She was neither happy nor sad, he said, just an average little girl like you would see walking down the street. But she was transparent, as if he were watching a reflection in a window. He began to feel extremely anxious as she came nearer, but still couldn't move. She did not look at his eyes, but he said that she looked at him as if she knew him. She acted like it as well. She climbed up into his lap and curled herself into a ball, as if to sleep, just the way you often see little girls do with their parents when they are tired. At that moment, he said his heart attack started. The little girl was cold and motionless as she sat in his lap, and he said the cold from her crept over his whole body until it began to feel like someone was squeezing the middle of his chest. He started to lose his breath, but there was nothing he could do. The little girl just sat there in his lap, filling him up with cold. Suddenly the subway arrived at the next station and the little girl dissolved, Thomas's words, from his lap just before he heard the door open. That's when the Good Samaritan who made the call came up to him. He said, Alex related that Thomas survived the incident and recovered fully. The calls about heart attacks continued to come in for another month or so, then mysteriously stopped just as quickly as they had started. No conventional explanation was ever found that could fully explain the incident. Alex offered a couple theories of his own as to what might have happened. First, he said that sleep paralysis is fairly common and often is accompanied by vivid dreams and hallucinations, which could explain what the man saw. Yet it does not explain the wave of heart attacks, all occurring to males alone on the subway, all between roughly the same stations. Unfortunately, for the sake of finding the truth, Thomas was, at least to Alex's knowledge, the only one to survive, and consequently there are no other stories to corroborate his. The other theory is that there really was a ghost of a little girl who caused the heart attacks on the subway. Like any big city, New York has a lot of domestic crime and many broken families. Alex speculated that she was a girl who was perhaps killed by one of her parents, or who maybe died when she somehow wandered into the subway tunnels after running away from home and spent the time after her death searching for her father. Of course, no one knows for sure. After Alex finished speaking, we all sat there silently, staring at the ground. Some upbeat song played in the background from the stereo, but the mood was dead by now and stayed that way until my friends and I went home. When we did, I don't think a single one of us took the subway that evening. The thing on level 4. To this day, I have no idea what I saw. People I tell seem to not believe me, but I swear this is true. A little background before I get into it. I am a 29-year-old construction worker. Been doing it since high school. Metal framing and sheetrock mostly. I'm in decent shape, No history of mental disorders in my family. Only problem I have developed over the years is a mild case of tinnitus from being stubborn and refusing to wear ear protection. It comes during times of silence, like when I'm trying to sleep. So I try to keep the TV or a fan on to cancel out the ringing. Work was getting very slow where I lived, so I decided to move to Virginia. I was staying with a friend who got me a sweet gig with a local construction company on Norfolk Naval Base. Huge job, 5-story building, complete build out from the ground up, good pay. Not exactly close to where we were staying, but the drive wasn't bad as long as I made it in before morning traffic. Only thing wrong with the job was the foreman was a complete asshole, always talking down to us workers in that sort of passive-aggressive tone that made me want to punch him in his face. But as long as we stayed busy, he didn't bother with us for long. It was a huge job, and he had a lot of people to bug. About 4 months into the job, I injured my right hand. Sliced my middle finger on a piece of metal. It didn't hurt at all. The doctor stitching me up said it was because I cut so deep it severed the nerves. The next day, I had to file an injury report and everything. My boss said he was going to put me on light duty and that I didn't have to do anything except sweep until my hand healed. I was all for it. Same pay for easy work. For the first week, things were all right. But then it started getting boring. I mean, really boring. The days dragged on, and I wondered why they didn't just pay me to stay home. So, naturally, I started wandering the job to kill time, checking out all the hallways, and there were plenty of hallways. Really long and gloomy looking when they were just gray brick all around. Some at the very top didn't even have temporary lighting and would have been pitch black if it weren't for the huge window cutouts on each end letting in sunlight. I stayed away from those hallways. They creeped me out. One day, I was feeling bored, so I decided to go walking around the 4th floor. Most of the work had been finished, and there weren't any other trades doing work there at the time, so I had it all to myself. It was around that time I noticed my tinnitus was acting up worse than usual. I figured someone must have had a generator running or something, so I started moving toward the other end of the hallway. About 3/4 of the way, my ears start painfully ringing. I tried sticking my fingers in my ears and humming, which usually does the trick, but the ringing was so intense. I started feeling nauseous, and I fell over on my hands and knees. I was slapping my ears, trying to make the ringing stop. My eyes started watering at one point because I was slapping my head so hard. I got up on my knees, still covering my ears, trying to get to my feet so I could make it to the stairwell, but the ringing was so intense, every move I made sent my head spinning. Moving slow helped, but not much. As I turned around, I noticed someone standing at the other end of the hallway near one of the window cutouts. The sun behind him was so bright, all I could see was a silhouette. I started yelling, "Help! Help!" as loud as I could, but the guy didn't move. I thought maybe he had earplugs in and couldn't hear me, so I started moving towards him slowly so my head wouldn't spin. As I got closer, I started noticing things I hadn't before. First, this guy was huge, like impossibly huge. His head was small in proportion to his body and near the top of the window. His shoulders were really wide and high, almost like he was shrugging. His arms were long, hanging down past his waist with really long fingers on each hand. I still couldn't make out any facial features because of the bright sun behind him, but as I started realizing this person wasn't normal, I slowly backed away. He just stood there, looking right at me. I was almost to the stairs when this thing slowly cocks its head to the side, like a dog does when it's confused, and the ringing in my ears just goes crazy. It was extremely painful. At the time, I thought my ears were bleeding. I was pressing my hands into my ears and yelling, but it was so loud I couldn't even hear myself yell. I dropped back on my hands and knees and threw up on the floor until I was puking air. I looked up to see if this thing was coming after me, but I caught a last glimpse of it as it walked into a nearby room. The instant it disappeared around the corner, the ringing in my ears just stopped, like someone hit the mute button. Needless to say, I ran the fuck out of there and didn't look back. I stayed away from the 4th floor for the next couple months. I told a few people what I saw, but they only pretended to be interested. It was about 5 months after it happened when I decided to go back up there. I checked every room. If there were any signs of this thing, they were long gone. I went to the window where it was standing and took a measurement. The top of the window was 10 foot 9 inches. I still have tinnitus. There have been a few times when I'm laying in bed at night and the ringing gets painful and I freak out and check every room in my apartment. But it never gets as bad as it was that day. I really hope it never does. The visitor from the closet. I've done my best to research this phenomenon, if it even is one, to no avail. There's not a single dream journal in print or through the internet grapevine that can ease my unsettled heart. 2 packs of cigarettes and a house to myself are all I have each night, and the light from the screen projecting the deepest and darkest corners of the internet are as comforting as a polite mugging. I just need to sleep without dreams. A few years ago, my father died. He was a good Nordic man, a sailor and a veteran with a heart of gold and a liver of blackened steel. After my mother stole my siblings and me away from him when I was a child, only to bring us to our jailer of an abusive stepfather, he has been my protector, my drunken, jobless, kind-hearted saint of a father. In the last few years of the boozing haze of his life, an entire 24-pack of beer would be drained within 12 hours every day. Each night he would fall asleep with a burning cigarette in his hand and an aluminum can at his feet. Our ranch-style deer shack of a house never burned to the ground, but that would most likely be an improvement. I'm currently nestled deep in the woods. The developments of concrete jumble miles away from the original homestead. When he died, I was 23 years old. I had no family, no husband, and no morals. On my 24th birthday, on an unseasonably cold day in May, I buried him. The priest and I had the occasion to ourselves. I've been doing drugs for most of my life, but the remainder of my money and pathetic inheritance fell into the deep hole that is cocaine addiction. A year ago, I tried to sell my couch in exchange for a couple of measly lines. Even today, I'm not far from that mess. Not much longer after that, I tried to kill myself. Earlier in that week, up to the attempt, I had been catching squirrels running loose in the attic and had no idea how to get rid of them. So one day, drinking a beer on the back porch, I went to the sack I had them in and tied it to the end of my black Mustang's exhaust. Got in and revved the engine for the entire woods to hear. When I opened the back, the corpses were charred black, slicked with grease and grime. It was then I knew I wanted to die. I jumped into her, my Black Widow, the Mustang, and shut the garage door. The ignition clicked over, engine blaring in the small concrete cube of a room. I lay back with a beer and closed my eyes, not even crying. But fate, or so it seems, want me to suffer. My father's Navy buddy, Ross, heaved the door open at the last minute, screaming, "Elena, Ellie," and dragged me out, semi-conscious, into the gravel driveway. He saved my life, and after such a kind deed, he died of lung cancer 3 months ago. Fast forward to 2 days ago. I was upstairs sleeping, and suddenly the door slams. "I'm home," my father bellows. Clear as day, as certain as the keys I'm using are real. I ran, tripping every step, to the stair overlooking our door. To see nothing, just the cold and reassuring loneliness that there isn't a soul on earth that cares about me. Even my dreams have started to turn. For years, I've read scary stories. They give me a sense of power over life, a feeling of control. The words on a page that send shivers down your spine are a thrill difficult to achieve in other places. But there is very little truth in any story out there. But my dream, the dream is reality. Reality is the dream, only in the sense that reality is the escape, not the other way around. The night of my father's voice, I slept deeply. The bed in my father's old bedroom sits in front of a closet door, but in my dream, it was blocked by something. At the wooden footboard of the antiquated frame stood what looked like a man. Very tall, well over 6 feet, dressed in dark colors. He wore what looked like a suit, but memory on the clothes is hard to come by. His face was very long, almost a horse-like quality, and pale. His irises were dark as well, and his expression was both blank and sinister. His mouth was extremely wide, and when he opened to speak, there were so many teeth I would certainly regret referring to him as a human being, but he never spoke, acted like he had changed his mind, and smiled, an ear to ear, wider than the Grand Canyon smile. And with that same grin, he lifted an overly long arm, with bony fingers like that of a massive spider, and reached out for me. With his pointer finger out, he touched my forehead, but never actually made contact with bone. Rather, the finger pushed my brain inside the skull. I felt as if he was informing me, touching me with knowledge. But what? I have no answer to that question. Last night the dream was similar, but he wasn't at the bed's end. He was standing at its side, like a family member stands beside the hospital gurney. He leaned in close to me, the features of his smooth and pale face, nearly translucent and corpse-like, the corpse that's been found floating under 6 inches of bathwater for days. This time he produced 2 fingers like a peace sign, and with the same terrible smile, pressed my eyes back, again never touching skin. His touch this time was cold, like having an ice cube against bare skin, only worse. On both occasions, I have awoken from the nightmare, with the closet door ajar, when it was clearly clicked shut each night, and thus brings me to my current predicament. Whispers across the street. These events took place when I was 5 years old in the rural South. You see, back then, my family was always moving from town to town because of my stepfather's work. Among the memories I have of this time include some family secrets that we still don't really talk about. What I'm about to relate to you is one such untold secret we would rather forget. The modest white house we had recently moved into was surrounded by 2 large willow trees that blocked out the sun, leaving our backyard shadowed and apart from the rest of the world. My 2 older sisters, Lila and Bridget, and I would often swing from their branches and climb their thick trunks, while our mother Diane and stepfather Richard would sit on the porch and contentedly watch us play in the late afternoon. We would ride bikes, swim in the inflatable pool, fly kites, and run on the slip and slide, you name it. We were very active children and never left a beautiful day unfulfilled. Across the street were a few other homes, and the sweet old couple directly across from us would often sit on their own porch and wave and smile at us, as they drank lemonade from a large pitcher and sat in old wooden rocking chairs. Our mother often waved cheerfully to them when we were brought outside, and their smiles and sweetness always made the day more pleasant. Until, that is, a few months after moving into the old white home, our mother got the 3 of us together, telling us there was something we needed to talk about as a family. She told us sternly that we were no longer to wave at the sweet, elderly couple across the street. She went so far as to tell us not to even look at them, and if we saw them waving at us, we were to come inside and tell her. This was an odd request to us. Nothing about the elderly couple seemed threatening or off in any way. Hell, our mother was the one who was always talking about how sweet they were to be, so friendly. So this request baffled us and continued to baffle us for the rest of our stay in this particular home. But we minded and no longer responded to the couple across the street. Soon they had been easily forgotten as we got on with our lives in other homes and other towns. That is, until I was 16 years old, having a pleasant dinner out with my sisters and mother. A rare occurrence for sure during this time of our lives. For whatever reason, over our evening meal, the conversation turned to that quiet old white house and the elderly couple across the street. As soon as the subject had been brought up, my mother's joyful face had darkened. Her eyes fell to her lap, and it took her a moment before actually addressing us. Part 2. She told us that she had been afraid to talk about the subject all these years, especially while we were still living in the home, afraid of needlessly making us afraid of staying in the quiet house in the shade of the willow trees. At that time, our stepfather had been working at the local Pepsi company, a well-paying job that allowed my mother to stay at home with the three of us, while still making a modest living for our family. Apparently, one of his co-workers had actually lived in the house beside the Willow home for nearly 6 years, and had only moved out the year before. My stepfather and the man were talking about the neighborhood and the house, when at some point, my stepfather mentioned the sweet, elderly couple across the street that liked to sit on their porch in the evening and watch his kids laugh and play. The man looked genuinely puzzled. He said that my stepfather must be joking, just pulling his leg. My stepfather replied, just as perplexed, with a sober face. The coworker told my stepfather that there was no elderly couple living across the street. Sure, there had once been such occupants in the small home, but they had both died horribly nearly 3 years before from carbon monoxide poisoning. The couple's stove had leaked gas for days before they finally succumbed to the poisoning, and it took longer than that for anyone to find the dead couple. The man knew because he was the one who crossed the street to check on them, only to find a ghastly scene. He recommended we leave the house in the shade.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.